It started with a smell. Not the kind of smell you forget in an hour, not the kind you wave off with a laugh. It was the kind that grabs your throat, burns your eyes, and makes you realize something has gone terribly wrong. But before we get there, before the sewage turned Karen's little campsite into a nightmare she'll never live down, you need to understand why it came to that. Why a quiet farmer like me would ever be pushed that far. This wasn't just land to me. It wasn't a spare lot sitting idle, waiting for someone to slap a playground on it. It was my family's farm, and it had been my sanctuary for as long as I could remember. I was born here. My earliest memories are of rooster crows breaking the dawn, of running barefoot across wet grass that clung to my ankles, and of my father's boots crunching gravel as he walked fence lines before the sun was even fully awake. The soil under my feet wasn't just dirt, it was history. My grandfather carved these pastures out of wild brush after the war, stone by stone, sweat dripping down his back, determination written in every furrow of his brow. To anyone else, it was a patch of fields and a weathered red barn. To me, every crack in the wood, every fence post leaning just slightly off-center told a story. And that history came with a lesson my father drilled into me early on. A man's land is like his skin. When someone trespasses, you feel it in your bones. I didn't fully understand that as a boy, but I understood it the first time the HOA came sniffing around my fences. At first, it was subtle. A road paved a little too far past the subdivision boundary. A walking trail sign hammered into the earth a few feet on my side. I thought maybe it was sloppy surveying, an honest mistake. Who in their right mind would think farmland belonged to a suburban HOA? Then came Karen. You've met her kind before. Blonde bob cut sharp as a blade. Pastel cardigans that looked like they were pulled straight from a catalog. And a voice, God help me, that could peel paint off a barn door. She didn't become HOA president because she was wise or kind. She got there because she was relentless, loud, and knew how to make weaker people back down. She started small. I'd see her by my fence with a clipboard, muttering about unused land as if every acre should be paved over and monetized. She once told me, dead serious, just imagine the property value boost if this farm became a community recreation zone. I laughed in her face. Thought it was a joke, but she wasn't joking. The subdivision pressed right up against my southern fence line, neat rows of identical houses, lawns trimmed to the inch, garden gnomes, gossip over hedges, and leaf blowers firing up at 7 in the morning sharp. To them, my wide-open pasture was an eyesore. To me, it was peace. But peace doesn't last when someone like Karen decides it's wasted space. One morning, I stepped onto my porch with a mug of black coffee steaming in my hand. I was ready for chores, fixing a sagging gate, patching a water line when I froze. Right in the middle of my pasture stood a neon green tent. Around it, a family of 4 was cooking sausages on a little camp stove, laughing like they were in a national park. For a moment, I thought maybe they were lost, confused about the county campground 2 miles down the road. So I walked over, boots crunching in the dew, and asked politely what they were doing. The father smiled at me like I was the intruder. Oh, Karen told us this is the new community campsite. Community campsite. The words rang in my ears like a slap. That afternoon, I drove straight to Karen's house. She opened the door holding a sparkling water, her smile smug like she'd been waiting for me. Oh, don't be so dramatic, she said, waving her manicured hand. It's just a little camping. The neighborhood doesn't have space and your farm is perfect. You should be honored. Honored, as if it was a privilege to watch strangers trample my fields, leave their trash behind, and light fires yards away from a barn full of hay. I told her flat out it wasn't happening. My land was private, period. But she leaned in, eyes glittering, and whispered, You can't stop progress. The HOA has spoken. And in that moment, I felt it in my bones, exactly what my father warned me about. She wasn't just testing boundaries, she was rewriting them. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the war. She didn't just test me, she humiliated me. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of my old alarm clock blinking red numbers into the dark. Her words wouldn't leave my head. You can't stop progress. The HOA has spoken. Progress, she called it. To me, it was theft wrapped in pastel colors. The next morning, I thought maybe the nightmare had passed. Maybe that one family was the extent of it. But when I stepped outside, the smell of lighter fluid hit my nose before the rooster crowed. My boots crunched on gravel as I followed the sound of voices, and my stomach turned. More tents, not just one this time. Half a dozen staked into the soil I'd spent years tending. Children ran through my pasture like it was some amusement park. Cars, SUVs mostly, lined my gravel drive, their tires flattening the grass along the ditch. One man dragged a full-sized gas grill out of his trunk and set it up not 50 yards from my hay barn. Sparks floated into the breeze from a makeshift fire pit. I swear, my heart skipped a beat thinking about how quickly the whole place could go up in flames. I stormed across the field. "What the hell do you people think you're doing?" A woman in yoga pants looked up from her folding chair, gave me a cheerful little wave, and said, "Oh, hi, Karen said it's fine. We're setting up for the HOA family campout." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Family campout, on my land, my land. By noon, the invasion had grown. More cars, more tents, teenagers blasting music through portable speakers, the bass rattling my barn walls. Two boys thought it would be funny to chase my chickens, feathers flying as the birds scattered in terror. A tent stake punctured one of my irrigation hoses, and when I asked a man to move his car off my alfalfa field, he smirked and said, "Relax, dude, Karen cleared it." Those 3 words, Karen cleared it, burned hotter than fire. And then I saw her. She marched down the rows of tents like she was some kind of camp director, clipboard in one hand, iced latte in the other, a whistle dangling from her neck. She even blew it once, barking orders at a group of kids climbing my fence. "Careful with the farmer's toys, sweeties," she chirped. My tools, my fences, reduced to toys in her mouth. When she saw me, she smiled, that smug, sugary smile that made my fists itch. "Isn't it beautiful?" she cooed. "Families bonding, children laughing, property values soaring, it's everything I dreamed." I stepped closer, boots grinding into the dirt. "This is private property, Karen. You can't just turn it into your personal campground." She tilted her head, pretending innocence. "Private property is such an outdated concept. We're a community. And besides, you weren't using this land, it was practically wasted." Wasted, the word stabbed at me. This land fed my animals, grew my crops, and carried my family's history in every blade of grass. But in her eyes, it was nothing more than a blank slate for her vanity project. I wanted to shout, to scream, but she cut me off, blowing her whistle again and turning her back like I was a disobedient child. "Try to relax," she said over her shoulder. "You might even enjoy it if you stop being so selfish." Selfish, that one word hit harder than anything else. She wasn't just stealing my land, she was painting me as the villain for not handing it over. And the worst part? The campers believed her. They laughed when I argued, rolled their eyes, muttered about the grumpy old farmer who didn't know how to share. By the time the sun dipped low, the damage was everywhere. Trash littered the ground, plastic cups, beer cans, candy wrappers. Someone dumped greasy dishwater straight into my irrigation ditch. Smoke from their fire pits clung to the air, mixing with the sour stench of spilled beer. My animals were restless, penned in by noise and strangers. That night I sat on my porch with a cold cup of coffee in my hands. The glow of campfires dotted my pasture. The sound of laughter on my land churned in my stomach like poison. I stared into the dark until the embers blurred, my father's words echoing in my head. "A man's land is like his skin. When someone trespasses, you feel it in your bones." And I felt it deep down, every bone aching with violation. That was when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding, this wasn't some neighborly mix-up. Karen hadn't just overstepped, she had declared war. I thought the sight of strangers camping on my pasture was bad, but what came next? That was worse. That was when Karen made it official. It happened at one of their monthly HOA meetings. Normally, I avoided those like the plague, arguments about mailbox heights, complaints about Christmas lights, petty squabbles over lawn ornaments. But every now and then, I'd show up just to keep an eye on what they were scheming. My farm sat right along their boundary, and I wasn't naive. You keep an ear open when trouble starts sniffing at your fence. That night, the air in their little clubhouse felt off, the kind of charged hush that comes before a storm. I slipped into a folding chair in the back, the kind that squeaks under your weight no matter how careful you are. The smell of stale cookies and lukewarm coffee clung to the air. A few neighbors gave me awkward nods, some looked away, pretending they didn't see me. And then she walked in. Karen. She was glowing. Clipboard in hand, pastel cardigan buttoned to her chin, a smug grin plastered across her face like she'd just solved world hunger. She tapped her pen against the podium, cleared her throat dramatically, and started her performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, pausing long enough to make sure every head was turned. "Our community thrives because of shared values, but one thing we've been missing is shared experiences." Her voice dripped with importance, like she was unveiling the cure for loneliness itself. People leaned forward, some even nodded. She held up a stack of papers and fanned them out like she was dealing cards at a casino. "I propose the establishment of a community campsite, a place where families can bond with nature, where children can learn the outdoors, where neighbors can grow even closer together." Applause broke out, honest-to-God applause. I nearly choked on the stale cookie I'd grabbed from the table. And then she did it. She turned to the big neighborhood map pinned on the wall. With a bright red marker, she circled my farm. "The perfect location," she declared. Every head in the room swiveled toward me. I raised my hand. My voice was steady, but my blood was boiling. "Excuse me, that's my land, my private farm. You can't just—" She cut me off with a laugh sharp enough to slice through the air. "Oh, don't be so territorial. Property lines are flexible. And besides, your land is practically unused. Why should it sit empty while our community suffers from a lack of recreational space?" The room murmured in approval. A few parents clapped harder. One man whispered something about saving money on vacations. I wanted to scream, to shout, because it's mine, that's why. But Karen wasn't finished. She waved the stack of papers like a queen with her decrees. "We've already run surveys. Families are desperate for safe, local camping. Think of the children, think of the property values. This will make us the envy of the entire county." Applause again, louder this time. I stood, slammed my palm against the folding table so hard the metal rattled. "You can't just take my land because you're too cheap to book a campground. This farm has been in my family for generations. It's not for sale, not for lease. And it sure as hell isn't for a bunch of busybodies with marshmallow addictions." Gasps rippled through the room. A few stifled laughs. But Karen, she didn't flinch. She smiled that venomous smile and said, Now, no need for hostility. We're not taking your land. We're simply repurposing it. Think of it as your civic duty. Don't you want to give back to the community?" Give back? My jaw tightened so hard my teeth hurt. These people hadn't given me a thing but headaches and trespassers. Then came the kicker. She straightened her shoulders, voice sweet but deadly. "If he refuses, we'll just classify it as community property. After all, the spirit of the HOA is to share. It's not right for one man to hoard so much land when so many could enjoy it." Hoard, that was the word she used. As if dawn-to-dusk labor, sweat dripping down my back, fixing fences, feeding animals, keeping the soil alive, was selfish. As if my family's sacrifice was nothing but an obstacle in her climb to HOA glory. The board nodded, parents murmured in approval, and I sat there, fists clenched in my lap so hard my knuckles ached. When the meeting ended, I walked out into the cool night air, the sound of applause still ringing in my ears. Each clap felt like a nail in the coffin of reason. They didn't see me as a neighbor anymore. To them, I was just a stubborn old farmer standing in the way of their fun. And right then, standing under the dim glow of the clubhouse lights, I realized something bone-deep. Karen wasn't just testing boundaries. She was rewriting them. And if I didn't push back hard, I was about to lose everything. The morning after Karen's little presentation, my farm didn't look like a farm anymore. It looked like a county fair that had crashed into a landfill. I woke up early, same as always, expecting to feed the chickens, mend a section of fence, maybe cut hay before the sun got too high. But when I stepped onto my porch, coffee steaming in my hand, the sight stopped me cold. Cars, a whole caravan of them. SUVs, minivans, even a rented U-Haul parked half on my gravel drive, half on the field. Doors slammed, trunks popped, coolers thumped onto the grass. And out in the pasture, neon tents sprouted like weeds after a summer rain. At first, I thought maybe I was dreaming. I rubbed my eyes, blinked, took another sip of coffee. But the scene didn't change. Families hammering stakes into the soil. Kids shrieking, chasing each other through my carefully cut hay. One man unloading a bounce house. Yes, a bounce house from the back of his truck. Then I caught the smell. Lighter fluid and smoke, wafting from a fire pit someone had built out of scrap wood they'd scavenged from near my barn. Sparks drifted dangerously close to dry grass. My heart lurched. I clenched the coffee mug so hard the ceramic nearly cracked. I stormed across the yard, gravel crunching under my boots, and shouted, "What the hell do you people think you're doing?" A woman in a sun visor looked up from unfolding a lawn chair. She smiled like I'd just asked for directions. "Oh, hi. Karen said it's fine. We're setting up for the first official HOA family campout. Isn't this wonderful?" Wonderful, my jaw tightened. "You're trespassing. This is my farm, not a campsite." She waved a dismissive hand. "Relax, you're welcome to join us later for barbecue." Barbecue on my pasture. By noon, the invasion had grown. Cars lined the road, blocking my access to the equipment shed. Teenagers blasted music through a portable speaker, the bass thumping through the barn walls. Two boys chased my chickens until feathers flew like snow. Someone dumped a bucket of greasy dishwater into my irrigation ditch, the gray stream bubbling into soil I'd worked for decades. And then I saw her. Karen. She strutted down the rows of tents like she owned the place. A whistle dangled from her neck. Clipboard in one hand, iced latte in the other, sunglasses perched on her nose. She looked like she was auditioning for Dictator of the Outdoors. When she spotted me, she smiled as though we were partners in this madness. "Isn't it beautiful?" she cooed, sweeping her hand over the chaos. "Families bonding, children laughing, property values soaring. It's everything I dreamed." I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "It's everything I feared. This is private property, Karen. You can't just turn it into your campground." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Private property is such an outdated concept. We're a community, and besides, you weren't using this land. It was practically wasted." Wasted? The word stabbed deep. This land fed my animals, kept a roof over my head, carried my family's legacy in every stone wall and fence post. But to her, it was nothing more than an empty lot waiting for her signature. I nearly shouted, but she blew her whistle at a group of kids climbing my fence and turned away, chirping, "Careful with the farmer's toys, sweeties." Then she faced me again, her smile sharp as a blade. "Try to relax. You might even enjoy it if you stop being so selfish." Selfish, that word cut worse than the rest. She wasn't just trespassing, she was rewriting the story, painting me as the villain for protecting what was mine. And the campers believed her. They laughed when I argued. Some rolled their eyes, muttered about grumpy old farmers who didn't know how to share. By evening, my pasture looked like a disaster zone. Trash everywhere, plastic cups, candy wrappers, beer cans. A tent stake punctured the hose I used to water my livestock. When I went to check the barn, I found two kids swinging from the rafters like it was a jungle gym. Their parents shrugged when I scolded them. "They're kids," one woman said. "Lighten up." By the time the sun set, I wasn't exhausted from farm work. I was exhausted from policing trespassers, from arguing on my own land, from watching the place my grandfather carved out of wild brush reduced to a playground for people who saw it as nothing but free space. That night I sat on my porch in the dark, fists clenched around a cold cup of coffee. Campfires flickered in the field. My animals paced restlessly. Smoke and spilled beer churned in the air. And across the pasture, Karen's whistle shrieked like nails on a chalkboard. For the first time, I realized she wasn't going to stop. She wasn't the type to back down. She would keep pushing, keep demanding, keep twisting the story until my farm was gone piece by piece. And as I stared into the glow of those stolen campfires, one thought burned hotter than the embers. If they wanted a war, they just got one. By the third day of Karen's so-called community campsite, my patience had snapped thin as barbed wire. My farm didn't look like a farm anymore. It looked like a festival ground after a tornado. Patches of grass trampled flat, trash scattered across the pasture. Fence posts snapped where kids had decided to explore. The smell of burned wood clung to the morning air, mixing with sour beer and garbage. My animals were skittish, my chores undone, my sanctuary swallowed. So I marched straight into the chaos. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, but the noise was already unbearable. Families lounged in lawn chairs sipping sodas, acting like they were at a county fair. Children screeched as they swung on ropes tied to my apple trees. Dogs barked, chasing terrified chickens in circles. And there she was, Karen. She strutted across my pasture in a bright yellow sundress, sunglasses perched on her nose, clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of authority. She blew her whistle, barked orders, laughed with her little kingdom of campers. I didn't bother with greetings. My boots pounded the dirt as I stormed up to her and snapped, "This ends today." She turned, lowering her sunglasses just enough to peer at me with mock surprise. "Well, good morning to you too, farmer. Isn't it glorious? Look how happy everyone is. You should be proud." Proud, my voice cracked. Of the trash, the broken fences, my livestock running wild because your circus terrified them. This isn't glorious, it's vandalism. Her laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "You're being dramatic again. This is community spirit, something you clearly don't understand." I stepped closer, voice low, fists clenched at my sides. "No, this is trespassing. You've invaded my farm without permission. I want everyone off my land, now." For a second her smile faltered, but then she straightened, smirk curling across her face. "You don't get to decide that anymore. The HOA has spoken. This land benefits the neighborhood, and majority rules." Majority rules? The words hit like a hammer. "This isn't a democracy, Karen," I snapped. "This is private property. My deed doesn't dissolve just because you and your fan club voted on it." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Don't be so technical. Property lines can be adjusted for the greater good. Besides, do you really want to be the man who denies children the chance to enjoy the outdoors?" And there it was, her favorite weapon, guilt, twisting her theft into sainthood, making me the villain for defending my home. She leaned in, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You're outnumbered. You're just one man clinging to a field. I have the whole community behind me. Who do you think they'll believe, you or us?" Her smugness was gasoline on the fire already burning in me. My jaw ached from clenching it. My voice came out flat, icy. "Karen, you need to understand something. This land is mine. My family built it, worked it, bled for it. You step one more foot across this boundary and you'll regret it." Her eyebrows shot up. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." She laughed loud, shrill, enough for the campers nearby to hear. Heads turned. Some smirked, others shook their heads, muttering about the angry farmer. Karen, never one to waste an audience, spread her arms wide and called out, "Oh, don't mind him, everyone. Our farmer friend here is just having trouble adjusting to progress. He'll come around eventually." The crowd chuckled, a few people clapped, and in that moment I felt every eye on me, mocking, dismissing, stripping me of dignity on my own land. Karen's voice cut through it all, smug and triumphant. "Don't fight it, farmer. The HOA always wins in the end." I turned on my heel before I did something reckless. Walked away with my pulse pounding in my ears, her words echoing like nails on a chalkboard. I sat on my porch steps, fists balled, rage vibrating in my chest. I'd made my stance clear, and she'd laughed in my face. Humiliated me in front of trespassers. That night, as I gathered trash left by careless campers, I remembered my father's words again. "A man's land is like his skin. When someone trespasses, you feel it in your bones." Well, my bones ached. My heart screamed for justice. Karen believed she had all the power because she had a crowd. But crowds are fickle. They cheer when things are easy. They scatter when things go wrong. She thought she was untouchable. But I knew better. The confrontation was over. The war had officially begun. The morning after that showdown with Karen, I decided to try one more time to do things the right way. As much as I wanted to toss every tent and cooler into the road myself, I knew Karen would twist it. She thrived on drama. If I lost my temper, she'd spin the story and suddenly I'd be the villain, the angry farmer attacking families. No, I told myself, this time I'll let the law handle it. So I picked up the phone and called the sheriff's office. "Ma'am," I said as calmly as I could manage. "There are dozens of people trespassing on my farm. They've set up tents, built fires, harassed my livestock. I need officers here now." There was a pause on the line, then the dispatcher sighed. "Is this about the HOA again?" My grip tightened on the receiver. "Yes," I snapped. "They've turned my farm into some kind of campground." Another sigh. "Sir, we've received multiple calls about it already. Unfortunately, the paperwork they submitted shows some kind of approval for community use. It looks like a civil dispute, not a criminal one. We can't intervene unless someone's in immediate danger." I nearly dropped the phone. "Community use? What paperwork? That's my land. I hold the deed." "I understand your frustration," she said, her voice dull, rehearsed. "But you'll need to handle this through the courts." The courts, weeks, maybe months of red tape, all while Karen's campers trampled my fields every weekend. I thanked her through clenched teeth and hung up. Fine, I thought. If the sheriff won't help, maybe the county will. I drove down to the courthouse, my land deed clutched like a lifeline. The place smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I waited in line, tapping my boot against the tiled floor. Finally, I reached the counter. The clerk, a young man who looked barely out of college, typed lazily at his computer. "Name?" he asked without looking up. I gave it. He squinted at the screen, frowned. "Oh yeah, I see what's going on here. The HOA submitted an application for a temporary community recreation designation on adjacent land. Looks like someone signed off on it." My stomach dropped. "Adjacent land, that's my farm." He shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. "I don't make the rules, sir. You'll have to file a formal complaint. Processes take time. You might want to hire a lawyer." I leaned across the counter, lowering my voice, jaw tight. "Son, do you understand what you're saying? My property has been stolen in broad daylight, and you're telling me to take a number and wait my turn." His eyes darted nervously to the security guard standing by the door. "Please don't raise your voice, sir. I'm just explaining procedure." Procedure, the word tasted bitter. Still, I left with a stack of forms, papers that would probably gather dust in some office long before they made any difference. On the drive home, I called a lawyer I'd worked with once during a property line dispute. He listened patiently, then sighed. "Honestly, I've dealt with your HOA before. They're slippery. They file just enough paperwork to muddy the waters. You'd win eventually, but litigation would cost thousands, and it could drag on for months. Do you really want to spend that much just to prove what's already obvious?" "Yes," I nearly shouted. "It's my land." "I get it," he said gently. "But the court won't issue an emergency injunction unless you can prove irreparable harm. Property damage, livestock injury, something concrete." I hung up without saying goodbye. Irreparable harm. What did they think trampled crops, spooked animals, and burned pastures were? By the time I pulled into my driveway, the campers were already gathering again. More tents, more cars. Karen stood at the gate handing out flyers like she was running for office. I stormed over, snatched one from her hand, and read the bold letters. HOA Family Campground Festival. Music, food, fun, all ages welcome. And below that, location, community pasture formerly known as the farm. Formerly known as the farm. The words twisted my gut. "This is fraud," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You've falsified documents, lied to your neighbors, and stolen land that doesn't belong to you." She smirked, perfume hanging heavy in the air as she leaned close. "Call it what you want. The HOA approved it. The county stamped it. The sheriff won't lift a finger. Face it, you've lost." My hands trembled. "This isn't over, Karen. You've crossed a line, and lines have consequences." Her smile widened, poisonous. "The only consequence here is that you're irrelevant. This is bigger than you. You can't fight progress." Progress, that's what she called it. That night I sat at my kitchen table with the flyers spread out before me. My hands shook not from fear but fury. I had tried the sheriff, the county, the courts, even a lawyer. Every door had slammed in my face. And it hit me then. If I wanted justice, I couldn't wait for a courtroom. The system was built to protect people like Karen. Loud, manipulative, shameless. If I wanted justice, I would have to deliver it myself. I stood on the porch under a sky so clear the stars looked careless, and for the first time since this whole thing began, I let myself imagine the end. How it would feel to walk across that field and find the tents gone, the mud smoothed, the last piece of Karen's smug face blotted from every neighbor's memory. The thought was small and bright and dangerous, like a match. It warmed something in me that had been raw for weeks. Planning, I learned, is a quieter kind of rage. It doesn't roar, it measures, it listens. It watches where others only shout. I didn't want drama, I wanted proof. I wanted the truth to land so heavy that even Karen's loudest lie couldn't lift it. The sheriff had shrugged. The county had handed me forms. The courts wanted time I didn't have. So I set about the only thing left that would stick, the record of harm and a moment that would force everyone to see what was already obvious. First light the next morning, I walked the perimeter like a man checking a heartbeat. My boots made the same small sound they'd always made, leather grinding gravel, like a metronome counting every small, stubborn day I'd spent here. I fixed fence posts that had been snapped by curious kids. I replaced a punctured irrigation hose with a spare, thinking about how each repair was a footnote in a story I didn't want to lose. I posted clear signs, private property, no trespassing, big, plain, impossible to miss. I bolted the gate where one of the campers had been sneaking in at dusk, the latch whining like a complaint. All legal, all visible, all evidence. But evidence is only useful if someone can see it for what it is. So I photographed everything. The beer cans, the burnt patch where someone thought a bonfire was a good idea near the hay, the footprints that wove through the alfalfa like a map of entitlement. Time-stamped each photo with the little gray bar on my phone. I recorded short videos, kids swinging from rafters, a family dumping gray water into my ditch, a man backing his truck through the edge of my alfalfa, and I kept them organized, neat, because chaos is easy to discredit when it's messy. Clean, steady documentation, that's what the court could use, and what a decent editor would eat up. I called a friend at the paper, the one who still liked real stories more than clicks. I kept the conversation bland and factual, no fantasies, no threats. There's a temporary campsite on private land, I said. I have evidence of hazards. If you're interested, I can show you. He came by that afternoon, lifted his camera solemnly, and when he left, he said the kind of thing that made my stomach unclench a fraction. This will get people's attention. But attention isn't the same as consequence. For that, I needed something that couldn't be spun into a sob story. I needed inspectors, health, safety, county, walking through this place and shutting it down for reasons that mattered. I could imagine the headlines then. Unauthorized campground closed over sanitation concerns. The kind of headline that carries 1,000 papers to Karen's door. The kind of headline that would force signatures to be checked, permits to be produced, and explanations to be offered. So I filed the anonymous tip to the county health line. Possible public health violation, temporary campsite, request for evaluation. I didn't tell anyone where I'd heard it because I didn't have to. I just showed them the mess and let the rest follow. That was the legal chess. There was another part of the plan, and this is where I paused for a long time, long enough for the moon to move across the sky twice. I could have gone scorched earth, smashed the tents, pull speakers into ditches, set fire to the bounce house. Those fantasies felt as loud and satisfying as a fist to a wall, but they'd make me the monster in any headline Karen didn't already own. I wanted consequences to stick to her, not to me. So I kept the meanest ideas on the shelf and looked for a quieter, undeniable way to change the campers' minds about their little weekend. I walked the grounds at night when the laughs were muffled and the embers blinked like small, guilty stars. That's when I checked the old access hatch by the barn, the one my grandfather used to mention like a secret only he and I were supposed to know about. Rust had eaten part of its rim. The lock squeaked. Old pipes ran beneath my feet, as familiar as the lines in my hand. I won't pretend to be technical. I am not an engineer, and I didn't need to be. I saw what the land could do, and I saw the opportunity to turn the hazard into a lesson. I rehearsed in my head for hours, not the how but the why, why boundaries matter, and what it costs when they're ignored. Morality is a heavy thing to carry in your pocket. I slept badly that night, thinking about small faces woken by crying, about parents who'd come in good faith for a cheap outing, about my dirt-streaked hands and the history beneath them. I thought of my father again, the way he'd say, "You don't let people walk over what keeps you fed." I thought about consequence versus cruelty, about whether the two could ever live apart. I wanted the story to land where it belonged, not as a revenge porn spectacle, but as a blow that made people stop and ask why it had been allowed to happen in the first place. At dawn, with the sky a pale, bruised blue, I did the only thing I was willing to do. I lifted that hatch. The metal gave a whining protest, like an old man clearing his throat. I didn't go into detail here. I won't give a blueprint for damage, but I will say this. The farm had a secret that night, and I chose to use it. I set nothing on fire. I harmed no one directly with force. But the thing I released moved faster than any argument and smelled far worse than any insult. It spread low and sure, seeping under tent floors, soaking into sleeping bags, coating coolers and picnic tables with an invisible, humiliating proof. At first people laughed, thinking it a prank. Then a child cried, then another. Phones appeared like tiny white flags. Karen's face, when she saw it, changed from amusement to confusion to something raw and unmasked. She grabbed at her clipboard as if it could save her. The sound that filled the field wasn't just surprised voices. It was a chorus of people who suddenly knew they'd been wrong. Panic, yes. Shame, yes. And a long, cold recognition that the easy cheer they'd made at my expense had a price none of them had wanted to pay. When the first of them stumbled toward the road, dripping and sullen, I stepped back into the shadow of the barn and felt the weight of what I'd done settle on me like wet clothes. It was effective. It was ugly. It was done. The hatch creaked behind me, and for the first time in a long while I didn't know whether I'd defended my ground or forfeited my soul. By sunrise the next morning, the so-called community campsite was gone. The field looked like a battlefield after retreat. Tents collapsed half-zipped, coolers abandoned, folding chairs tipped on their sides like skeletons of a party that ended too late. A trail of minivans and SUVs stretched down the road, each one loaded with families who had arrived grinning and left gagging. The smell still clung to the grass like a scar, sour and unforgettable. I stood on the porch with my coffee in hand, boots dusty, eyes burning from sleeplessness. For the first time in weeks there was silence. No whistles, no shrieking children, no bass thumping through my barn walls, just the soft rustle of wind across the pasture, the same sound my father had listened to when he built this farm from scratch. But peace didn't come clean. It came with wreckage, trash matted in the grass, a section of fence half-toppled, footprints embedded deep into the soil. My chickens still refused to leave their coop, spooked from days of chasing. My animals looked at me with the same wide-eyed unease that I carried in my chest. And then there was Karen. I saw her that morning standing near the ditch by the road, her pastel cardigan streaked with mud, her clipboard gone, her whistle dangling uselessly around her neck. She wasn't strutting anymore. She wasn't smiling. She looked small for once. Shaken. Her hair was frizzed from the night, her arms crossed tight against the chill, her face pale and hard. We locked eyes. For a second I thought she might march over, unleash another tirade, spin another speech about progress and property values. But she didn't. She just shook her head, muttered something I couldn't hear, and climbed into the passenger seat of a waiting SUV. The door slammed, and the car drove off, taillights blinking until they disappeared around the bend. That was the last time she set foot on my farm. The fallout came fast. By noon, I was getting calls from neighbors, not apologies, not at first, just stunned voices, embarrassed explanations. We didn't know she hadn't cleared it. She said it was approved. We thought it was legal. Excuses, one after another, like a string of beads. They didn't erase the damage, but they showed me something. The tide had turned. Karen's spell had broken. By the end of the week, the county health inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, boots sinking into the muck. He didn't stay long. One look at the photos I'd collected, one whiff of the lingering stench, and he scribbled his notes with a grimace. The HOA had filed paperwork, yes, but the truth was in the dirt, in the ruined ground under his feet. By the next morning, the headline ran just like I'd imagined. Unauthorized campsite shut down over sanitation and safety violations. Neighbors read it at their kitchen tables with their coffee. Parents who had clapped for Karen at the meeting now whispered about her behind hedges, shaking their heads, embarrassed. By the end of the month, she resigned as HOA president. Personal reasons, she claimed. Everyone knew better. The HOA itself limped along after that, quieter, less bold. They still bickered over mailboxes and lawn paint, but they never set foot on my farm again. My boundaries had been tested, and they'd learned the hard way where they ended. I wish I could say I celebrated, that I danced across the field, triumphant, free, but the truth is different. Standing there, watching the sun set over a pasture littered with reminders of their trespass, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, bone-deep tired. Because fighting for what's yours takes more than energy. It takes pieces of you that you don't get back, nights of lost sleep, days of suspicion. Trust burned away until you can't look at a neighbor without wondering what they'll try next. But I also learned something. Something I think my father had always tried to tell me in fewer words. Sometimes, standing your ground doesn't mean waiting for someone else to enforce your rights. Sometimes, it means being willing to carry the cost yourself. Karen thought she had the numbers. She thought she had the system. She thought she could turn my family's farm into her personal project because the crowd cheered loud enough. But crowds are fickle, and truth, no matter how long it takes, doesn't bend forever. That night, when the last tent was hauled off and the last of the sewage dried into the soil, I sat on my porch again with a mug of black coffee. The gate creaked in the wind, the barn smelled faintly of hay, and the stars blinked overhead like quiet witnesses. I breathed deep, let the cool night air settle into my lungs, and I thought, the farm is still here. I am still here. And sometimes, survival is victory enough. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.